looking at. I'll show you the book by John Osgood, who's associated with creation research here in Australia. He's a real expert on some of the dispersal parts, and I find it really interesting. This is a sign that some of our regular viewers would be familiar with that we have at our museum at the Creation Discovery Centre, showing the biblical timeline from Adam through to Jacob, the pre-flood timeline. And I've had people that are not believers say, you know, this is the first time I've ever heard the message of the Bible presented, linking it in with real history. So a lot of people find this quite interesting. And I thought we'd just work through it. You can see the time frames. This is part of a talk on the present is not the key to the past, because if the present is the key to the past, then our ages of living 70, 80 through to maybe maximum 100 years would indicate that in the past, that's what people have done at best. And that makes 900-year-old life spans unrealistic. But if it's not that way, if something's happened, and of course those who are familiar with this subject would know it was the global flood there, the blue line that goes down through there, that is the changing point in history. And it is in fact the past that was vastly different. God created a good world, and in that good world, even though sin had tainted it, people could live at least 900 years. And that carried right through to Noah, who also lived 900, even though it was sort of 1700 years after Adam. Whereas after the flood, then you go down through Faxad. This is on the line of Shem through a Faxad, and you get down through to Jacob. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Sorry, I have to click on that. There we go. That should be moving through. Now, Josephus, the first century historian, said this: "Let no one, upon comparing the lives of the ancients with our lives and with the few years which we now live, think that what we have said of them is false. Now I have for witnesses to what I said, all those who have written antiquities." And he then goes on to list the Greeks and the barbarians, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Phoenicians, and a few others. And they all agree to what I here say, that the ancients lived 1,000 years. So Josephus was very, very certain that the biblical history was true, the pre-flood history of their ancestors. So when the ark landed on Mount Ararat, the Bible says how they moved east onto a plain. So they may have moved onto that plain even further north than that. And eventually the Tower of Babel was being built, and that's where God dispersed the people through confusion of the languages. And so I just wanted to work quickly through a summary, and I think using Noah's grandsons is an interesting summary of how the dispersal began. And this again comes from John Osgood's book. I hope I'm doing John credit with what I've put together as a summary, because it obviously becomes quite complicated as different peoples interacted with other peoples, conquered them, and so on. But early on, at least, you can get a general drift of where people went. So looking at the sons of Ham first, John says how they came around this way, most likely skilled with boats, and they came around this way. And you've got Cush went into Ethiopia, and in fact the ancient name for Ethiopia was Cush, and that's probably now our North Sudan. And then a lot of the Cushites spread out through Africa, and then others moved in as well. Mizraim, grandson of Noah, the ancient name for Egypt, and that is obviously the Egyptian area. And then you've got Put, which John Osgood believes really to be the father of the Berber tribes, so the North Africans, sometimes used to describe Libya. There's some dispute about that, but at least the Put descendants were most likely the Berbers. And then you've got Canaan, and most people have heard of the Canaanites and the land of Canaan, and that was a grandson of Noah. So people go, oh, a real person. Yes, it was. But the Canaanites also are linked with the Chinese. And so John's done some great work just recently linking this together. Now, we have Mount Sinai in the southern part there, just where the bottom of the arrow leading to Canaan over in the Canaanite area is. And that's quite possibly a link to the same term, the Sinites, the Chinese. So even today, we talk about Australian Sino-political relations and your US Sino relations. And this is where it comes from, the Sinites, descendants of Canaan. And the Canaanites also spread through into India, Southeast Asia, and are probably the ancestors of even the Australian Aboriginals. Again, I just highlight that it is quite complex, but this is a broad picture. Now, the sons of Japheth, let's have a look at those. So Javan, often referred to as the father of the Greeks. So he's moved through this way. And some of his sons, for example, Rhodonim is where we get Rhodes Island and the Rhone River. So they moved through that. Rhodes Island has been called Rhodes Island for as long as people can remember. And that's a descendant of Javan. So Greece, Italy, and most likely the early settlers of Tarshish. Tarshish being Great Britain. Some people think it's Spain because there's Tarsus there, but it's a good chance that it worked the other way, that they were in Great Britain where they mined tin, and the Bible refers to tin being mined in Cornwall, England, and that's in Tarshish, and they then moved across to Spain and settled there at Tarsus. Madai, another grandson of Noah, the Madais or the Medes and the Persians from Madai. You've got Tubal, another grandson of Noah in the Turkey region, also mentioned by later prophets in the Bible. You've got Magog. They crossed the Caucasus there between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and they became the Slavic groups and others later on. And then you've got Gomer, who is the father of the Scythians, and they moved back around into Turkey. So when Ezekiel 38 talks about Gomer, it's most likely talking about the Turkey region, but certainly Russia, Turkey sort of connection there. So that's the sons of Japheth. Oh, actually, Gomer, one more there, is also the father of the Celts and the Gauls, who moved, of course, across into Europe and the French area. Okay, so that's a bit of a picture of dispersal from Babel from two of the sons of Noah and their sons. But then we've got Shem, who his descendants largely stayed around the original area. And so here are his descendants all there together, spread from Babel. Elam, we've got there to the east of Babel. And in the scriptures, we hear of Abraham interacting with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and the Elamites, who came over with several other kings and attacked a range of kings over in the Sodom and Gomorrah area. And then Abraham got involved because his nephew Lot was taken captive by them. You've got Asher there, and that's where we get the term Assyrians. And in Australia, just the last week, we had some bad news of an attack on an Assyrian bishop. So this is fresh in a lot of Australians' minds. They've heard of Assyrians, and interestingly, that comes from Asher, the son of Shem. Aramaic, most people have heard of the Aramaic language. That comes from Aram, and most likely the Arameans are from that line as well, although there is some dispute about that. There's Lud, is where we get the term Lydia, and then Arphaxad, which is the one that we get the line of Abraham through. So let's just highlight Arphaxad for a moment. His great-grandson, I think it was, is Eber, and that's where we get the term Hebrews from, the Hebrews, if you like. And that's why Abraham, who was a descendant down the line of Eber, is referred to as Abraham of the Hebrews. Now, he probably didn't take that path that I've drawn there across the desert, but that's more indicative of where he ended up. He was instructed by God to go to the land of Canaan, and that's where he went. And of course, the Canaanites had been well established by that time that this happened. So, yeah, there's just the link there. Eber, the grandson of Arphaxad, the great-grandson of Shem. And in Genesis 14, we get Abraham called Abraham the Hebrew, and that's why. But let's have a look at Jacob. I often ask the people that come to the museum, what did Jacob change his name to? And a lot of them sort of shake their head, don't know. And I said, well, his name was changed to Israel. He had 12 sons, 12 tribes of Israel, basically. And most people go, oh, really? Yeah, real person, and it's a real place even to this day. So Jacob, when he was in a time of drought, moved down to Egypt with his family, not realising that one of his youngest sons, Joseph, had become second in charge of Egypt. And so that's why he had the opportunity to meet Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And this is the exchange here in Genesis 47. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So basically here, Israel is acknowledging that his forefathers lived longer than him, even though he was 130 years old. And he ended up living to 147. But he knew that he wasn't going to live as long as Abraham, which was about 180, and so on. So what's going on? What did the flood change? Well, I think genetics is one of the things. Abraham married his half-sister Sarah, and there was no biblical law against it. In fact, the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all of their children obviously had to intermarry. So they were marrying their cousins effectively, and there was no biblical law against it. Their genetic stock didn't have those sorts of problems that we see now. In fact, down the bottom right, you can see we get up to about 1600 BC there. Well, around 1500 BC, Moses wrote the first laws against incest, against close family marriage. So the degradation had occurred, obviously, in the genetic realm. The genes had degraded to the point where God intervened and said to Moses, no more intermarriage of close family members. And Moses himself still lived to 120 years. We get down to King David around about 1000 BC, and he lived to about the age of 70, and he had probably circulation problems. So this is showing a genetic decline, probably things like UV, maybe disease, droughts, because as Jacob says there, he had a very hard life as a shepherd, droughts and so on, and that's why he went to went to Egypt in the first place from Canaan. And it fits in very well with the fact that the past is the key to the present, not the other way around. Just one little final slide, just to show you some examples from the Sinites, that they took the same stories of the flood and Genesis, and this is some Chinese characters, and I've had Buddhist Chinese, not believers or anything, confirm that these are in fact true. you get dust. You add breath. You get two persons and you put them in an enclosure, and that, in fact, is the Chinese pictogram for garden. Okay, well, you've got two trees and a god in its abbreviated form, and that's forbidden. So those familiar with the biblical story would know that God forbade Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but there's also the tree of life that was there, and that was the reason he banned them from the garden in the end, so that they wouldn't eat of it. You get two trees and women, and you get this idea of coveting and desiring. And we know that Eve did, in fact, desire or covet the fruit. It looked good, and she wanted it. How did the Chinese ever draw this as their word for covet and desire? It's very strong evidence that there is a link between the ancient Chinese and the true stories of the beginning of time. And many of our regular viewers would have heard and seen this one before. You get a vessel plus 8 people, or in fact, if there's Chinese people watching, you'll know that that is probably the symbol for mouth, but same idea. 8 mouths, 8 people on a vessel is the Chinese symbol for boat. How many people were on Noah's Ark? There are 8. And we've had Chinese people come to our museum. One particular lady I remember called Caroline, who said that as a child, her Buddhist mother in China would tell her stories of a flood that destroyed the world. And she remembered being very scared as children because her mother would then say, but the next time the world's going to be destroyed by fire. And they'd be very scared. They weren't Christians or anything like that. But she moved to Australia and became a Christian. And praise God, her mother did as well.